check.
Yeah. Sorry for that.
All right, I'll wait till you give me the thumbs up.
So my YouTube doesn't want to load.
Technology, eh?
It's wonderful when it works.
Okay.
Yep, my YouTube's not. Let's see if it'll load.
I have to check, Chairman, and we are broadcasting live now.
Yeah.
Ready? Okay. Evening, everyone. Welcome to this online meeting on Tuesday, the 19th of January 2021 of the Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Chris Pearson. I'm a councillor for Beerchurch and I will be chairing this evening. The meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available to watch afterwards. Just a few matters of housekeeping. With the exception of Democratic Services officers advising us, would all participants please mute their microphones unless they're invited to speak. I'll ask for each item of business to be presented and then ask members if they wish to speak or ask a question or comment. At the end of each item of business, I'll ask each panel member in turn to confirm audibly whether they wish to vote formally or not, and I will put that to you. We may have a break at 8 p.m. subject to the progress of business. This evening, because of one or two Treasury matters that are on the agenda, we've also invited members from the scrutiny panel to attend and to contribute to those items as well. If I could just go around and ask you to introduce yourselves. I'll start with Councillor. It's all right, I'm just waiting for my participant list to come up. Here we go. Councillor Gocher.
It's Councillor Mark Gocher representing Castle Ward.
Councillor Wood.
Councillor Barbara Wood representing the Tiptree Ward.
Councillor Willits.
Dennis Willits representing the Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Councillor Hogg. Sorry, no, Councillor Cope.
Substituting for Councillor Nick Barlow this evening, I represent Christchurch and Newtown. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas representing Stanway Ward.
Councillor McCarthy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Sam McCarthy. I represent Pwrb End Ward and I'm also the Deputy Chair of this committee.
Councillor Willits.
Thought I'd done it already.
My apologies, Dennis. It's that the participant list is moving, unlike usual. Councillor Bourne.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, panel. Councillor Tina Bourne representing Greenstead Ward, and I'm a member of the scrutiny panel, not a member of this committee.
Thank you. And Councillor Hogg, are you here from scrutiny?
I am indeed, Chairman. Councillor Mike Hogg, St Anne's and St John's scrutiny panel member.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
Yes, good evening all. Councillor Chris Hayter, St John's Anne's, and sitting in tonight as a representative from the scrutiny panel.
Thank you. And Councillor Cope's already introduced that he is substituting for Councillor Barlow on the committee this evening. Item 3, there are no urgent items. Item 4, declaration of interest. Anyone have any declaration of interest at this stage? Not seeing any hands up. Item 5, have your say. I've had no indications of have your say. So we'll move on to item 6, minutes of the last meeting. Can we, are there any Any issues, and can we take those as an accurate record? If you're in agreement, just nod your approval. Yeah. Thank you, members. Right. Now, because we have one or two confidential items this evening, I felt when we had the briefing last week that it was probably advisable to move the item around CCHL to the end of the agenda so that it fits in with any confidential matters that might arise from that. So I'm going to move to item 8 first, which is the annual audit letter 2019-20. So if Mr. Cook, if you'd like to introduce that for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the next stage after the approval of the statement of accounts at the last meeting, and is a standard letter from our external auditors, BDO, that summarises the findings of the audit, and that is set out in the table on section 6.2. So I don't think there are any issues I wanted to comment on further, though could take questions after I've presented the report. And then the other thing that's happening is set out in section 6.5 onwards, that particularly for 1920 audits, we believe that less than 50% of the audits have been completed within the regulatory timetable, even though for this year's audit it was extended from the 31st of July to the end of November. So given these market failings, MHCLG commissioned a review by Sir Tony Redmond, who was previously the Chief Executive of London Borough of Harrow. So there are a number of findings which are set out in the report and MHCLG's response. I think the key elements that concerned us really were that the timetable will be changed again for next year's audit. So we think the publication date with audit opinion will become the 30th of September. And there could also be quite a significant fee increase, because I think the firms feel, they're unable to make a return from the prices set by public sector audit appointments. And they do need to improve the skill base of their teams. MHCLG have indicated there may be an initial grant to local authorities to meet any increased costs, but I think in the longer term, it could be a significant increased cost for us, albeit the audit fee at the moment is 60,000. So it's not a huge element of the council's budget. I just feel it's a bit unsatisfactory that, we've got quite a good record, I believe, in Colchester, producing the accounts to quite an early timetable. And it's great to be able to come to governance audit quite early after the financial year and get the previous year signed off with a clean opinion so we can concentrate on next year's budget. So I think, these changes will go forward because there obviously have been big difficulties with the audit. So it's to keep the committee informed, and that we will probably need to come back to a future meeting once we've got more clarity on the timetable. And to be fair, there is an issue with the firms pointing out that it may be okay for MHCLG to set a September deadline, but there's a big overhang from the 1920 audits yet to be finished, half of them. So whereas if they were starting with a clean sheet, they might be able to do 30th September, that some of the firms are arguing could be quite difficult given they've got a lot of 1920 audits to complete. And just finally on fees, we have had some discussions with BDO, and we would hopefully come back to the next meeting with an agreed revision to the fees. I think there'll be two components to that. One would be a long-term permanent increase because we're now audited as a group, including Amphora. So that is a legitimate change in the cost. And then there were some one-off items in the 1920 audit, particularly some work in relation to Amphora, which was reported to the previous committee, and the pension pass-through arrangements. So basically, I think, it's a good audit letter. We're going to have to watch carefully what the new rules are for timetable and scope of the audit, and hopefully that's a reasonable introduction to the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. And before I bring anyone in for comment, I just want to thank you and the team for the sterling work that you did in ensuring that Colchester Borough Council submitted its audit letter in a timely manner.
Thank you, Chair. I'll pass that on to the team because, I think they do put in a very good effort, and it's nice to see it succeeding.
Yeah, well done. Any questions or comments? I know we've looked at this on more than one occasion over the year. Councillor Willits.
For my own education, Chairman, I'm still a little uncertain as to why it is, as reported in paragraph 6.2, I think it was table line 3, that we were having difficulties with the auditor valuing the pension liability because of coronavirus difficulties. Having read the text in their glossy, I'm still not wholly sure why it is that the two issues are linked, unless it is that all their people are actually down with COVID and they can't do the work. I couldn't see the technical relationship between COVID and uncertainty of the valuations.
If I could come back on that, Chair, I would share your views, Councillor Willits. COVID really kicked off right at the end of that financial year, and I think there's an element of the external auditors being guarded about any valuations in the balance sheet in the event that in future years' audit, where there'd been a bigger COVID impact on the economy, those valuations might change significantly. So I don't think it's a major issue, and on pensions, we're really guided by the triennial valuation, which is quite a way off now. So I think to some extent it's the external auditors being quite cautious.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more hands up, so we're asked to just consider and note the 2019-20 annual audit letter, which we've done, and also to note Mr. Cook's advice and guidance to us around the Redmond review, which no doubt we'll pick up in the next council year. Thank you. Right. So, having noted, with no decision to make, we'll move on to the next item, please, which is the mid-year internal audit assurance report. And Ms. McGrath, you're going to introduce this for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the mid-year report. It details the work undertaken by internal audit between the 1st of April 2020 and the 30th of November 2020. Now, you may recall that we have a new internal audit provider who started on the 1st of April. So they started at a very challenging time in terms of the pandemic outbreak and actually getting to grips with a new organisation. But I think they've done very well. The feedback that I've had from officers is very good about the performance of the auditors. And tonight we have Fiona and Olu from TIA who have joined me So once I finish my presentation, if there's any questions you'd like to ask them, feel free. I think Fiona will probably just introduce the TIA organisation and their approach to internal audit. We've also set out for you the internal audit report that they provide. So they provide an update, and that's attached to your appendix. It's a very new format. So previously with internal audit reports, we would give you a written update and detail some of the audits that have been carried out. You can see from the appendix that's been attached, TIA have given us a very detailed update, which I think is appropriate to share with yourselves. They've also set out some key issues in the internal audit world. So not necessarily issues that are affecting Colchester, but things that we need to be aware of. And what I'd like to point out is obviously we've had 10 audits completed in the period. That's slightly less than we would normally produce in the first half of the year. But given the issues with the pandemic and actually having a new internal audit provider, I think that's been quite good to get those achieved by the end of November. 7 out of those 10 audits achieved a substantial assurance rating. Now, the main difference between the previous provider and the new ones is the terminology that's used. So previously, our audits were classed as full assurance, substantial, limited, or no assurance. Under the new contract, we have substantial assurance, reasonable assurance, limited, and no. So what was previously known as full is now known as substantial. To have 7 out of 10 substantial audits is a real achievement. The other remaining audits, the other 3, have achieved reasonable assurance. So it's whether you had any questions or any things that you would like to ask the auditors.
Thank you. Welcome, Fiona and Olam, to our committee meeting. I'll pass on to you then.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Absolutely. If there's any questions on any particular audits, I'm more than happy to answer those, and so is Olu. Perhaps to just give you a bit of an introduction to ourselves. So I'm the head of internal audit for the contract, and Olu is the audit manager. With TIA, we are a dedicated internal audit service that does local account fraud service and security management as well. We are based down south. There's about 150 of us across the UK. So we do have clients and staff in Scotland, Ireland, Wales. Everyone's based all over. We've got a dedicated Norfolk then. We have a dedicated team in Essex and Colchester that does actually include Olu, who she is based there herself. So we have a dedicated team that works with you. We then have a wider team so that if anything happens with the local team or we need extra support, we then call on the wider team. And then from the wider team, we would then go to the rest of the organisation. The reason we do this is that we have then somebody within a local team that has the knowledge of the council and builds up the knowledge of the council to provide to you. And then with the wider team, they have still knowledge of the council. They'll still do the odd audit for the council, but they just have a little bit less knowledge. So it's always that we've got resilience there if we need it to bring in. In terms of how we work, we are obviously at the moment doing everything remotely. This is settled in really well. We found both here and all of the organisations we work with, the first couple of months of working so remotely, which for our end does work very well, but getting into sort of mobilising of undertaking an audit, providing the information to us, etc. remotely takes about 2 months for it to really fully bed in so we can see that flow well. That all happened in the early stages while you're already going through the initial pandemic. So it's really good to see that that has settled in. We have got good progress towards the end of the year. And in terms of allocating resources, we have allocated resources to all of the audits to the end of the year, but I will put the caveat that if any of our staff are particularly hit with COVID, that would impact on delivery of the audit plan to the end of the year. As it stands at the moment, the level of staff that have gone down with COVID and have come back to work, thankfully, that hasn't impacted on the plan. We do have resilience there in terms of resources to come in if we need it, but it's a caveat that I definitely need to put in. Perhaps if there's any questions.
Okay. I have just checked while you were speaking, and the report that's before us does actually have Colchester Borough Council on it. So you haven't.
It's only because I'm based in Norfolk, so I'm so used to saying I'm from Norfolk that if I say you have a team in Norfolk, no, we have a team in Essex.
No, I would say that from a personal perspective, I like the report format. It's very clean and easy to read and follow. So I'll open up to other members of the committee should they wish to comment or ask questions. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the sort of report I like to see when we're looking at our audit findings. All the reports have better than limited assurance, and there are no priority one recommendations. Occasionally, I think it's right that we as councillors start delving into what was happening when they're priority 2 or priority 3 recommendations. But on this occasion, there are no issues brought up in the narrative which really make me feel I should be asking questions about those. Whereas when there is a priority 1 recommendation, I think we should always ask questions and find out what it's about. So, I mean, looking at the overall picture, this is a good tranche of audits, which shows that the council's controls are in splendid condition. So long may it continue, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Willits.
Yeah, absolutely. In response to that, it's very pleasing. Both myself and Ollie work with a number of local authorities on the same areas that you have now, and it's very pleasing to come in for the first new year to see good controls in place. It's really pleasing to see, and that they do see they're working. Previous recommendations are implemented, yeah, it's good to see people take it seriously.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any more hands. So we're asked to just review and comment upon, and I think it would be remiss of me not to comment on our own internal team, and Hayley in particular, in the way in which she cracks the whip to ensure that we internally audit effectively. Thank you. Thank you both very much for your attendance this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, that moves us on to item 10, interim review of the annual governance statement action plan. And it's back to you, please, Ms. McGrath.
Thank you, Chair. So each year in June, I do a review of the governance arrangements for the organisation for the previous financial year, and that's reported through to yourselves and forms part of the information for our statement of accounts. As part of that review, we put together an action plan for areas where we feel that the governance arrangements could be improved and tightened. And rather than just leave that as a report in June, we bring back a progress report to you halfway through the year. So this report sets out the 3 items that were highlighted in the annual governance statement this year, and sets out the current position in terms of the actions that were agreed as part of that statement. And it's really whether you had any questions or you had any concerns about the actions that have been undertaken.
Thank you. Committee members, anyone wish to comment or have any questions? No, it's obviously a comprehensive report as usual.
I like those ones.
So again, we were just asked to consider and comment, and we've considered. Thank you. That moves us on to the risk management progress report, and over to you one more time.
Yep. So this is the interim report on risk management. We report to yourselves twice a year, setting out the work undertaken during the period with regards to managing our risks, and also giving you an opportunity to consider and comment on the Council's strategic risk register, which is owned by the senior management team. So I think it's fair to say that for the first part of 2021, a lot of the work has been undertaken in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of our key functions, obviously, as part of the framework are business continuity, and you have a separate report on that later on the agenda, but also emergency planning and health and safety form part of our framework. And I think it's fair to say that the resources that we have been used quite significantly with some of the back office procedures with regards to the pandemic and how the organisation has responded. However, we have been undertaking some risk management work as well, and we've been revising the format of the strategic risk register. And I've been working with both our auditors and our senior management team to look at how we can strengthen our risk management processes. I think it's fair to say there are still some actions that we need to undertake, and they came out as part of our critical review with our auditors. And I've got an action plan to take forward for the end of the 2021 year and into 21-22 to actually look at and review how we manage our risks and how we identify our risks. But one of the key changes you'll see on the strategic risk register is that we've reduced the number of risks down. Obviously, we've started to use the 2 levels of score, so the pre-mitigation score and the post-mitigation score. And we're actually trying to make sure that the control actions are classed as SMART, so they are actually achievable and actually measurable in terms of what we're doing. I've also been able to change the matrix. So previously, because we had printed agendas, our matrix was shaded, so it was hard to see the different levels of risk. Now that we're online and we don't have to print our agendas, we actually have a coloured matrix. So we have the traffic light system. So it makes it much easier for you to see where our high level risks are and our lower level ones. So really, it's whether you had any questions on the strategic risk register or any questions about the work that's been undertaken during the period.
Thank you. And again, I would just compliment the way in which the register is now produced. It makes it easier to follow and easier to read and see what's happening. Councillors, did I see Councillor Cope? Did I see your hand up?
Yeah, you mentioned social media in the previous report. What are your comments on the risks attached to social media in the general report that you just given on risks?
I think social media itself isn't classed as one of our strategic risks, and it's a difficult one because we could have a very long risk register with every issue and concern highlighted on it. So we have to be quite specific about what we actually monitor to this level. However, social media is a concern both in terms of the security of data and actually how social media is used. Now, as far as our strategic risks are concerned, we have a risk around IT security and data and cyber security. And our social media accounts come under that. And we've done a lot of work looking at social media to ensure the platforms that we use are appropriate and that actually only the right people can have access to those platforms. So the information that is used and put out there is actually relevant and appropriate. I think some of the concerns, obviously, there are wider concerns in the community about the impact of social media on things like mental health. And I think for our staff, we would pick that up through our mental health programmes. But as for a particular risk for social media, it's not highlighted on the strategic register. However, we do include it on the operational register for corporate and improvement services, where our IT function and communication sits.
Thanks for that helpful reply. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Willett.
Chairman, we read these documents through very quickly, and at times we don't see all the small print, but then occasionally a particular clause will jump out of the page and strike you over the head, which it did when I looked at item SP4 or risk SP4 compliance, where suddenly there was a weasel note which I hadn't seen before, which concerned the personal liability of officers and members. I wondered what this personal liability was, whether this was just a corporate liability that the public at large expect us to be good people and take decisions in good faith, or whether it meant that there was or there could be a risk to members in terms of surcharges, which I thought had been abolished, or other measures of personal risk, which members and officers might be subject after compliance failures.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to put everything into one paragraph on a risk register. But when we're talking about compliance, we're talking about all of those legislative issues that concern the organisation. And when we talk about personal liability of officers and members, one of the key ones that springs to mind is health and safety. And I know the Chief Exec is very aware of his liabilities in terms of health and safety breaches and where that actual liability rests and who would actually appear in court if there was an issue. And with members, whilst the work undertaken on our normal committees and panels is not necessarily of a nature where there might be personal liability, there are issues when they start to act as co-opted members on other panels and also on our boards. So when you're taking on the responsibility of a board member, you end up with some personal liability for that. Now, we have insurance against that. So we have officers and directors insurance. That means as board members, you are covered for any personal liabilities, but we have to recognise there is that possibility there.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's I think it's a good point to draw our attention to, Councillor Willits. And we'll know from previously looking at some of the council's policies that there are one or two where the leader has personal responsibility. If memory serves rightly, health and safety is also one of those. So there will be members' responsibilities, but doesn't sound quite as bad as your question might have implied, fortunately. All right. Any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I've been silent for a few papers, but I hope you wouldn't mind me just adding my my thanks as portfolio holder to the team. I think there is something for us.
Be silent all through the meeting, Councillor King.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I think there is something here about us acknowledging that what we're being given is an insight into the resilience of the organisation, as well as the quality of some of our leading members, and I include directly Hayley in that. A lot of strain and stress we all understand, and we'll see it in other organisations, has been experienced through COVID. So I'll keep it brief, but I think this once at least, bear with me adding my remarks to yours, because I think this is a real sign of strength, and that's important because what we're facing is a long period of sustained pressure on the organisation, not just from the pandemic, but how we respond financially in budgetary terms and in terms of straining at the organisation to give us more for the same money or less. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think for my overview from looking at this as well is that although there are 4 or 5 very high risk areas, with the mitigations, those are reduced to just one, which is COVID-19. So that's the one area where it's almost impossible in the current circumstances to fully mitigate the risks, or to significantly mitigate the risks at this time. So no, I again, at the risk of repeating myself, just thank you very much to you, Hayley, and the team for the excellent work you continue to do for Colchester Borough Council in not only monitoring but also mitigating the risks that we are posed as an authority. Thank you. So we were just asked to review and to comment again. So now we'll move on to Item 12, Treasury Management Annual Review. Back to you, Mr. Cook, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of initial points. One is we would usually expect to come earlier in the financial year with the review of the past year, but it was delayed for completion of the external audit. And then secondly, a key component of Treasury management is training for members. So we ran something about a year ago, which was a presentation by our advisors Link, which I think went quite well. So we're expecting to do that again next month. So we'll make that invitation open to all members, if that's okay. Then the other big sort of changes during this period, Pwrb rates, Public Works Loan Board rates moved around quite a bit because in October 19, without much warning, they were increased by 1% as a deterrent against authorities who were borrowing to make commercial investments, which of course we don't do. Then in March 20, just at the end of the financial year, MHCLG relented on HRA borrowing and removed the 1% addition, but left it for general fund. And then, as we'll see in the next report, in October 20, MHCLG also took the 1% off for general fund borrowing. So we're back to square one, which is good. And the current rates for 25-year money are 1.91% for maturity loans, which is a very, very good deal. So in the report, the appendix with a lot of assistance from Link sets out a lot of detail, but in summary, just on the recommendations, the reason we're asking for approval of Link Asset Services, who have performed well during the year in question, is that's a formal requirement to sit for their appointment should be confirmed. And then the report sets out, particularly in 4.2, how we performed against the various indicators. I don't think there are any difficulties there because of delays in the capital programme and reprofiling of projects. We actually borrowed less than we expected, so we kept well within all the limits. And as I say, there's quite a bit of information set out in the appendix with a lot of help from Link. So that's the 1920 review, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about fairly historical reports now with this one, but we have the opportunity this evening to at least look at and comment upon. Any questions or comments, members? I'm not seeing any hands up. Just slight, you did suggest in your commentary, Mr. Cook, that we need to approve the continuing use of Link services. That's not actually as it's written, so I'm just clarifying that with you.
No, you're right, Chair. It's to note the satisfactory performance. Thank you.
I just wanted to be sure that we did approve if we needed to, so that you have the authority. But other than that, then it was just a note and to ask any questions or to consider the report. We've done that. There are no questions or comments, so we'll move on to item 13, which is the mid-year review, where I think you may find that there are one or two questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this report sets out to the halfway stage of 2021 how we're performing against the Treasury Management Strategy. The Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22 onwards is about to go to Cabinet for recommendation to Budget Council, and will also be going to Scrutiny Panel on the 26th of January as part of their review of the budget. So this report again sets out that our borrowing has been significantly lower than originally expected. Considerable effects of COVID on the capital programme, but that we've kept within all the Treasury indicators, so there are no causes for concern there. And because we've had a lesser borrowing requirement, we have been able to use internal funds, and that has saved us external interest costs. So I would welcome any questions on the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor King, did you want to come in? You're on mute, David.
Apologies, Chair, and thank you for your patience. No, the only thing I will say, and I've said this before in session, that I'm not satisfied that we've got all of these judgments right, and some of our estimates and the reality, as we know, they differ. They're bound to differ because that's the nature of estimate and reality when it comes to calls for funds, delivery of business, and Treasury management is no different. What I can give an assurance and an explanation is plain that that's been a challenge over time, which I think in the round is improving, but there is absolutely no question that the last year has been very, very difficult for all of our key officers, and Paul Cook, our Section 151 officer, and those working with him are absolutely in the middle of a storm, frankly, of adjustment and change with extra demands internally and externally. None of that, as well as the contractual construction and other demands on service and therefore on cash and its management, are helpful. So that's all I'm going to say. We know that over time we've got to continue to not just have a robust approach, but also be able to demonstrate a tighter match between expectation and delivery over time.
Thank you, Councillor King. And before I open up to questions and comments, I would just like to thank you and Mr. Cook for the sterling work you've done over the last, well, nearly a year now, of keeping members up to speed with what's happening and the impact of COVID-19 on Treasury management. So thank you both, and thank you for Mr. Cook's team. I have Councillor Willits and then Councillor Cope. Councillor Willits?
Chairman, can I ask what advice we're getting from Link or generating it internally about the medium-term borrowing rates on which we are assuming the finances will be predicated? As mentioned in the report, we're actually heading into an era of negative interest rates, which could be damaging, because in the past our Treasury managers have been pretty agile at getting short-term money into the pockets of other authorities who've been paying us quite a sort of a handsome daily rate for the use of our money. And one would think that if as interest rates come down and down and there's further pressure, that those opportunities are going to become less. And secondly, we've seen massive quantitative easing by the government. I mean, they've been printing money or getting it from somewhere, trillions of the stuff to keep the economy going. And at some stage, that is going to balance out. And I'm not an economist, but the standard mechanism for that is for a massive increase in interest rates because of the inflationary tendencies of quantitative easing when it stops. Are these issues being built into our medium-term prediction of where our money is going to come from and at what cost? Or are we just hoping things continue as they are for the moment?
Thank you, Chair. In the Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22 onwards, which is going to scrutiny next week and on to Cabinet, we do address these issues with some forecasts from Link about future inflation, future interest rates, which, as Councillor Willits says, one might expect to see some increase in borrowing rates. We've got inflation forecasts that we look at. So yes, we have all that in mind in setting our strategy for 21, 22 and later years. I mean, I think it has been difficult over the last year, particularly with investments, because we have had a lot of money coming in and out of the authority. So, for example, the business grants, which we've redistributed very quickly to local businesses, we have seen tens of millions coming in one week and going out of the council the next week. So it has been quite a volatile situation, and I think in the years ahead we may return to a new normal, and it'll be much easier to sort of plan through the impact of some of these changes. But yes, in the strategy for next year and the years after, we do address those questions rather than sort of leave it to hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cope. You're on mute, Nick.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair. A couple of questions, really. One relates to Brexit, the other relates to universal credit. I see they're attached to the risk register of a previous report. Now, so I'm sorry if I've done that again and gone back to a previous report. Does the office have any comment on the supply chain as might be influenced by Brexit? And what are the office's comments on the impact of universal credit?
Are we talking in terms of Treasury management, Nick, or?
Yeah, Treasury management, yes.
Right. Okay.
I mean, as regards Brexit is now completed and it's become part of the forecast, which now includes the impact of COVID and other economic factors. So we are taking advice from Link and other sources, including Bank of England forecasts, on how that will work out. On universal credit, we have had a planned transition. Customer service operate housing benefit, and it's always been in service plans that would be a gradual transfer to universal credit. If more information were required about, the precise rates of change, I'm sure we could provide that after the committee chair, because I think there has been a slight increase in that there've been a lot of new applications and new applicants become immediately eligible for universal credit, I think, rather than transferring over. So certainly if that would be helpful, we can provide more information about the trends there.
Yeah, if we have that easily to hand, Mr. Cook, and you could circulate that to members of the committee, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of remarks, really going back to Councillor Willett's observations, if I can, just very briefly. And it's the same thing, really. It's about the assurance that when this is set by Paul and the team, and when it's scrutinised by myself and others, we do it as you would do it. We look to see the evidence of the best possible advice. We look to see spread of risk. We look to see prudence, and we look increasingly to make sure it's as clear as the complicated matters can be. I hope that you will see that when you get the strategy for the coming year, and it does reflect. I'll just sort of finish this. It does reflect, of course, the world we're in of huge uncertainty. The economic imperative once was, as described, that if you borrowed lots and lots of money, then up went inflation, and then up went interest rates. And of course, it's fair to say the world is still standing on its head at the moment, and that is not quite true. There's certainly no strong evidence from any source. But while we take professional advice from those we employ to give it to us, do test it. We do look at other sources of advice and information as well. And as I say, I hope that you'll find that a measure of assurance in what you receive in the new strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's reassuring. Mr. Cook, did you want to come in on?
Oh, just very briefly, Chair. Sorry to prolong the discussion, but I mean the other way in which we manage the risk of significant interest rate changes, we have got quite a long funding position. Most of our loans are in long maturities, and as we've seen in the previous report, they're only a small proportion maturing each year. So whilst it's certainly true, as Councillor Willits was saying, that if interest rates did increase significantly, new borrowing would certainly be more expensive. But on balance, most of the debt portfolio is in long maturities, so we'd have relative impunity against rising rates. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more hands up. I mean, I would just comment that the post-World War II economic cycles that we were used to didn't seem to return post the 2008 financial calamity, because there was a heck of a lot of quantitative easing implemented then, and yet we didn't see high interest rates as a result. So something different is happening in the economy, and as Councillor King's pointed out, COVID-19 throws all of that very much, a global pandemic throws all of those prognostications really into doubt at the moment, doesn't it? I don't think any of us or any economist could predict what is likely to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, never mind the next 10 to 15. Right. In this instance, we're not just asked to comment and note, but to approve the mid-year review. I think given that it's finances and we're asked to approve, I'm going to ask you, Matthew, if you can just do the honours, please, and go around and take a vote.
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. Members, you'll be familiar with the process now. I'll call your name in alphabetical order. Would you just please indicate whether you are for or against the motion? So we'll start with Councillor Cope, please.
Yes, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas?
For.
Councillor Gocher?
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
For.
Councillor Pearson?
For.
Councillor Willits?
For.
And Councillor Wood?
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous.
Thank you, everyone. That moves us on to item 14, the annual review of business continuity. We're back to you, Ms. McGrath.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Chair. I'm presenting to you the report from Lauren Warsap, who's our resilience officer, and she's the main resource for business continuity and emergency planning. So she deals with all the frontline stuff. We bring to you a report every year from the 1st of October to the 30th of September. Now, we also have a strategy, but it doesn't form part of the policy framework, unlike the risk management strategy. However, it's good practice to bring it to yourselves, so you have the opportunity to see the work that's been undertaken and to be able to comment and endorse the strategy for the coming year. So we've set out in the report for you some of the work that's been undertaken during that period. And I think it's fair to say that the primary focus for 2020 has been the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So whilst it didn't occupy the whole of the year, I think it's fair to say that it feels like it's been going on for some time. And it has required a significant amount of resource, both from the resilience officer and other members of the team, to make sure that the frontline response is supported. So in terms of, I mentioned before, under our risk management report, our health and safety officer has been heavily involved in advising services on how to operate safely. And when we had the opening of services after the first lockdown, it was looking at things like Leisure World and the museums, ensuring that we could operate those correctly. And with the business continuity processes, we have definitely tested our plans, I think it's fair to say. Obviously, we've been working on these for some time in terms of being prepared for an incident. And I think the pandemic has been a real test of some of those plans that we had in place. We have plans for services and also an overall corporate one. I think it's fair to say that on the whole, those plans operated correctly. And as anything, we've made some changes as we've gone through the pandemic, looking at how we actually would respond, as opposed to how we think we would respond to issues. But I think it's quite clear that the business continuity plans assisted us in those very first stages of how we managed the pandemic as it started to kind of appear in this country, and our responses from where we first started at the end of January, beginning of February, looking at issues through to obviously when we had the full lockdown in mid-March. And actually we operated our plans very quickly, and they actually worked in terms of how we thought we would respond, setting up groups, looking at things like resources, service delivery, etc. But we haven't just been dealing with the pandemic. We have been able to do some other work as well. So we've been working closely with the Essex Resilience Forum, and we work with them quite a lot to produce plans that are county-wide. So things like flood plans, which are quite relevant at the moment, and major incident plans. And we've also been providing support to the Essex Resilience Forum for the multi-agency information cell. So when we have something like the pandemic, the MAKE is set up by the Resilience Forum, and they are the coordination point throughout the county for all of the organisations. So we work quite closely with the likes of Essex Police, Essex County, the health services, the fire brigade, the ambulance service. Even the local garrison have been included in the MAKE and actually coordinating that information. And we've also been able to provide some emergency planning training. We've had to change the way we do it, like everybody else, so it's been virtual. And we've been able to attend large-scale exercises, and obviously being virtual has made that slightly easier. So we have been attending the EU exit exercises, and obviously now we are dealing with any residual issues from the EU exit, the main one being at the moment, obviously the issue with ports. Pleased to say that Harry seems to be quite quiet at the moment, but obviously the impact of the EU exit paperwork and the pandemic and having to be tested has caused some concerns about traffic, which hasn't, I'm pleased to say, hasn't materialised at the moment. So as I said, we set out the strategy for 2021. As I say, it's not something that needs to go through for full council approval, but it's an opportunity for you to be able to comment on how we manage business continuity and the processes that we use. So it's whether you had any questions.
Thank you. And certainly our business continuity plans have been tested to the nth degree over the last 10, 11 months. Thank you. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, it was delightful to hear that after all the hype we had about the disasters that would come with EU exit, in fact, our disaster plan was not needed. We've not even had to issue tickets to lorries parking on the A12 waiting to get to the ports. It all went like clockwork, as many of us expected it would have done. But if I can return to some of the more mundane issues in our business continuity, 2 points, Chairman. The first is that over the COVID era, if I can call it that, we've had majority of our staff working at home. Now this started, not COVID, but working at home, started quite some long time ago when we realised the benefits of it. But that as an issue was certainly sort of stressed by COVID, where we had more and more staff working from home, having to use remote workings. Now, I just wonder whether we have any observations or lessons that have been learned on the way we organise ourselves to ensure that we that there is the minimum possibility of the organisation creaking to a halt as a result of working at home. It was a major change. It was a major change which was thrust upon us at relatively short notice, although we we had a good feel for the problem beforehand. But I just wonder whether there are any observations in the context of business continuity about having so many of our staff working from home. Great news if we can sell off all our offices and plough the money back into services. But from the point of view of continuity, is there a downside, or has a downside been identified? As I guess there might also be some significant upsides. The second point, looking at our organisation, Chairman, we have become critically dependent upon one supplier, and that is Microsoft's Azure cloud service. And if that service was not available, almost in the context of the previous question, I wonder how we would manage to keep the services going. And is it a reasonable, I guess my question is it a reasonable assumption to say that for business continuity purposes, the cloud service on which we're so dependent will always be there and will always be working? And of course, that is to a certain extent a strategic decision which is out of our hands. All we need to see is one wrong move on trade negotiations with the Americans, and we may suddenly find ourselves in the position of the Chinese in terms of a very reduced cloud service. So those who say it would never happen only needs to look at other parts of the world to see where the cloud service has been considerably reduced in its scope and its ease of operation because of international relations. So those are my two questions, Kevin.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I go with the resilience of home working first, I think it's fair to say in the early days it was quite difficult in terms of the mass scale of rollout required to enable people to work virtually, not just officers but members as well, in terms of how we deliver the committees and being able to get everybody online for meetings like this. And I think those first few weeks it was difficult. I think now we're seeing the benefits of that and actually the ability for people to work from any location. One of our biggest business continuity issues in the past was the loss of a building in terms of how we would carry on delivering services if, for example, Rowan House burnt down. We've resolved that issue in terms of we've highlighted the fact that the lots of the office-based staff don't need to be in the office. That's not to say that it's a perfect world having everybody working from home. And I think there is a requirement for people to be in the office, not just from a work point of view, but I think from a mental health point of view, and actually that collaboration of teams in terms of people, not in the IT sense, but actually having that energy and that conversation in the office. So there are, I wouldn't say there are issues, but I would say they're not perfect in terms of being able to have that collaboration. However, the virtual side of being able to work from any location at any point has given us some great benefits. With regards to the IT side and the requirement for using cloud-based services, I think probably some of the technical parts of that are beyond my remit. But we do have business continuity plans for our IT. So we have disaster recovery plans to ensure that if we lose a service, an IT service, we can rebuild the information, we can access information, and we can also use other suppliers. Now, I think in terms of an issue with Microsoft, that if there was something, it would be more than just Colchester Borough Council affected. And I think there would be national issues in terms of a response to that one. But I think that's probably something I would want to develop with our IT side first to be able to give you a bit of a more detailed response.
Thank you, Hayley. Put on the spot and battered away quite well. Dan, did you want to just come in at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just briefly, just to echo what Hayley was saying, really, I think the organisation as a whole, members and officers have responded incredibly well to shifting to kind of online working where staff can work from home. Obviously, not everyone can, and there's many of our staff who are out there every day doing a fantastic job on the front line every day. We should also acknowledge that. But certainly the shift to online working from home has brought benefits, I would say. I think we've been able to demonstrate a lot of agility in our response to COVID and all of the unknown issues that's thrown up throughout the last nearly the last year. I think that Hayley's right. You do lose something in that lack of interaction in the workplace, some of the informal interaction, which I think is important. But we are not going to see our staff coming back into offices in anything like the way they used to in the future. I think that's clear. We are looking at how we use our buildings, particularly Rowan House and the Town Hall and Shrub End. But in relation to Rowan House, we think that will become much more a space for, as Hayley says, collaboration, where people need to work at a desk for some reason if they haven't got suitable conditions at home or another location, and where we can bring people together to really add value to their collaboration and how they can spark new ideas. And I think it's been acknowledged more broadly in relation to online working that it's fine for existing relationships and working patterns and teams. It kind of works fine, and I think we've experienced that. I think what we don't fully understand is what impact it might have for potentially new developments, new relationships, new collaborations within or outside the organisation. So that's something we need to keep an eye on. But I think the response has been fantastic, really, and we've dealt really well. And as Hayley says, in terms of the ICT, the cloud-based systems, our reliance on Microsoft I would say we're much more resilient now than we were a few years ago when we hadn't implemented our IT strategy, and we had a lot of legacy systems that were literally relying on servers in the basement in Rowan House, not being accidentally sort of having a cup of coffee spilt on them or a fire or something else, so actually the cloud-based systems that we've got are much more resilient. And I think we've been able to demonstrate that recently with a cyber attack we had before Christmas, which we were able to deal with very swiftly. And partly that's because of the systems we've got in place now.
Thank you, Dan. Councillor Gocher.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask how, as a council, we help people or council workers who maybe live out in the sticks, whose internet is not that good in terms of connectivity. I mean, at college, for example, we've got members of staff who live in villages like Tolsh and Darcy and things, and the internet comes on and off. So what do we as a council do to help our staff who maybe live in places where the internet is intermittent or something?
Yeah, where we have significant issues, and the majority of staff have good or reasonable internet connections, where we know that there is a particular issue, we are able to give them Wi-Fi dongles. So we've been able to support them with that, and we have been rolling out new and improved laptops to all staff to make sure the connectivity is as good as it can be.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, and I'm sure Dan Hayley won't mind, that we touched on mental health and how our staff fare. And they know, but I also do know that we work at this. The council works at this as it should. So it talks to its staff, requires managers to do that independently through HR, which is where I get my insights and have my conversations. Follows up with people and how they are. It tracks absence and causes of absence, and it continues to do what it can to provide support. So I think it's just, I know members will care about this because each of us will know some of those strains and stresses. And I'd just like to give that assurance that from my perspective, at least, that continues to remain as it should. Really important, and in the circumstances we're in, has to remain so as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor King. And I think members of this committee have expressed those concerns at previous meetings as well, to ensure that not only officers but members as well, their mental health is given due consideration in the current circumstances. It's not been easy both for staff working for CBC or for those of us who are members of CBC to move into the new world. You know, for some of us, it was probably a lot easier than others, but I think the way in which we are holding these meetings now is testament to all the sound work that's been undertaken by Dan and the rest of the team to ensure that it is working successfully. So well done, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. I note that we're asked to consider and comment, but also to endorse the business continuity strategy for 2021. I'm not, unless anybody else, unless any member objects, I'm not proposing that we take a named vote, but just if you indicate by a show of hands that you endorse the strategy, please. I think that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks.
And that takes us to increase in the write-off delegation to £10,000. Hayley, are you introducing this one as well, or you, Dan?
I can. Paul Cook's probably the most qualified to introduce this one, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Mr. Cook? I think we've lost Paul then.
We might have lost Paul. Well, yeah. I'm happy to just introduce it, Chairman. It's a fairly straightforward item. It's about write-off limits for debts and to officers, which has been set at £5,000 limit for about the last 10 years. It's simply requesting an increase in that limit to £10,000 to, which just means that we won't have to go to the portfolio holder every time we have a write-off over £5,000, which we do at the moment. I don't think it introduces any unnecessary risks. It simply means that we'll be able to respond more swiftly where we need to.
Right, thank you. Got a couple of hands up. Councillor Dundas.
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, my apologies if it is in the report, but I couldn't find it. Just to put this in some sort of context, in an average year, how many debts do we write off between 5 and 10,000?
I'm sorry, Chairman, I don't have that information to hand, but I can certainly come back to the committee or see if I can get hold of a finance officer now.
Yeah,
just to put it in the sort of context of the scale we're talking about, really.
Yeah, I think if memory serves rightly, when we had the briefing last week, Paul, that was a question that was posed, and I think we responded to with the answer that it was just a handful. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, will these, I'm in favour of increasing it up to 10k. That seems an eminently sensible thing to do. But will these be formal decisions of the council? I know we're not encouraged to call in, unlike other councils which have greater accountability, we're not encouraged to call in matters. The Constitution makes it frightfully difficult. But occasionally one sees write-off of debt where you think, well, you know, what's it all about? Was the judgment quite correct? Perhaps not at the 10k level, but when we see portfolio holders writing off some hundreds of K, it certainly does cause eyebrows to raise. So, I mean, will this be in the context of a formal decision which can be seen and questioned by councillors?
It's not a published decision, but it will still need to be signed off by the Section 151 officer, which I think should give some assurance to members that the decision will be taken with due process.
Thank you. Councillor King.
I don't want to cut across Councillor Gocho was first. I'll follow him if I may, Chair.
And I thought you wanted to come back in on that query.
Well, all I would sort of say is just, you know, this is about taking some measure of authority away from me and placing it somewhere in the organisation. This because of the ease of administration. This is not going to make any difference to the way in which the organisation approaches this. I have a regular dialogue I don't have to have it, fortunately, when it comes to write-offs very often, but I absolutely have the conversation regularly about revenues and collection, as you would expect I would, as any one of you would. So on council tax and business rates and so on, when debts are due, we want them paid. And we I think, from what I've seen, we have both an award-winning revenue team. Nice to be able to say that. What that means is they do better than others. Other parts of government go to them, and they go to them because the quality of judgment, and this is what this is about. When you look at the paper, it's really an uplifting for inflation more than anything else, but it's for ease of administration. And so I'm comfortable as a portfolio holder that the approach of the organisation, because otherwise I'd go the other way, I wouldn't support increasing the limit if I thought there was carelessness. There isn't. Still accountable, still public money, but it has to be done. We have to accept that you can't get every penny that you're due in the course of any year. It'll be interesting what this coming year will bring us. This is an administrative measure. This is absolutely not about taking the foot off the gas in terms of getting in the money needed for our services. And I have to say, last thing, Chair, if I may, having worked in central government for what it's worth, this is frankly noise, and I don't say that to be dismissive at all, nor to suggest it doesn't matter. Absolutely it does. As I say, the attitude is to secure what's owed as it should be, and when it comes to loss, to do the same. You know, you don't write off lightly. So I just want to try and give a personal assurance to members that the way that the organisation is run, as we've seen for the last hour, is robustly. And this is just one small part. It's just a little bit of ease to make the administration a little bit more effective. If you say you don't agree, well, you know, the way we manage will not or should not change, because we're, as best I can tell, doing the right thing as we should. Proportionate application of pressure to secure money is due, as well as I say, proportionate judgments in helping people all the time. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Willits, did you want to come back on the responses?
Yes, Chairman. I mean, there are two issues. One is judgment, one is governance. And at no point have I questioned anyone's judgment in their proposals to write off funds. I mean, whenever I've taken a look at them, they've always been soundly based. And there's been a good rationale of why it would cost more to collect a debt than to write it off. So it's in the interests of the authority just to write it off and actually save money. It's the governance question that I was interested in that if an officer writes off 10k, it sort of falls below the horizon, whereas if a portfolio holder writes off 10k, it may not well fall below the horizon, and it may be a formal decision required to do that. And in governance terms, I'm not sure that I've quite squared that in my mind.
Right, thank you. Councillor Gocher.
Yes, I mean, when I saw this on the agenda, it did puzzle me a bit. So, I mean, to me, 10k is a lot of money. So what I'm wondering is, in what circumstances do we end up writing off 10k? I mean, is it things like, what kind of examples can you give us? Is it things like non-payment of council tax by private individuals? Is it some kind of corporation owing us money? But who is likely to be owing us that amount of money and have the debt written off? Have there been any examples of this where it's happened? That's what my main concern, because obviously, connected with that, the other question would be, how often does it happen? And we've already kind of answered that question, but it could end up with us writing off quite a lot of money if it's 10k. But in what circumstances does it happen?
Thank you. I see Mr. Cook is back, so I just wonder if you have any information that you could impart to us, Paul.
Yes, apologies, Chair, just had a few internet problems. The write-off process, I don't know if it'd be helpful if I just went through that briefly, because what happens is, obviously the customer service team are working very hard on collecting both council tax and business rates. And as Councillor King says, you know, our collection rate is very high. So we do make every effort to collect every debt that is owed to the council in accordance with our income management policy. And whatever the level of write-off, unless it's a very trivial level, which is probably just a technical adjustment of a few pounds, the write-offs have to be authorised by myself and the customer services manager. And that can apply up to a level of £5,000. So that would be quite a significant debt in terms of council tax. But the main area is business rates, because as you can imagine, you know, there's a lot of change on business rates. And it's much more difficult sometimes to collect business rates if companies have gone into liquidation owing business rates. 5,000 is not a huge value, but every effort is made. So, for example, you may find that the owners of the business cannot be traced, or there's a liquidation and no assets in the business. A variety of reasons. We would always seek to recover the maximum amount possible for the council. And then at the same time as this process is going on, which could last more than a financial year, perhaps 2 years even before we consider write-off, when we close down the accounts, we make a realistic provision against any outstanding debts. So we look at the quality of the debt, if I could put it that way, in a sort of inverse way. You know, how likely is it that this debt can be now collected in view of the age and the circumstances of the debt? So by the time we're looking at writing off a debt, we've probably essentially provided for the cost of that debt already in the accounts. It's not an additional cost to the council, but it does mean that the teams can concentrate on the debt where there is a good prospect of recovery. I mean, as you can imagine at the moment, the teams are working absolutely flat out because that group is not only continuing with the normal process of council tax collection and business rates collection, but they're dealing with paying out all the business grants, where we've got one of the best profiles in Essex. When we get the grant money in from MHCLG, we disperse it as quickly as possible. So they are very, very busy people. You can imagine with the COVID issues, there's a much bigger take-up of LCTS, which local council tax support, which is run by that team, etc. So basically, the idea is, you know, if possible, to free up time to concentrate on the debts that we can collect. And the write-off, when it comes, is after a long process of trying to recover the debt. And the financial cost of the debt, of not recovering the debt, has already been borne in the council's account because we've had to make a provision. So yes, it is, you know, the final sort of formal act of writing off the debt, but I can assure you, no, nothing goes forward to a portfolio holder until it's been checked by myself and the customer services manager. So we get schedules of debts, particularly business rates debts, perhaps 30 or 40 at a time. And then we sample check, say 10 or 15 of them. We get the detailed records, we look on the system just to double check, you know, the information that's being provided and the reason for the write-off. So nothing would go to a portfolio holder for write-off before it had had a lot of officer checks in the first place. And I just think, you know, it's such a long time since the limit was set that, you know, it would be appropriate to increase it given the workload in the section, particularly with all the COVID issues. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Councillor Gocher, did you want to come back at all on that?
No, I mean, that's very helpful. I was just kind of, you know, just wondering what kind of debt it was, but you know, you kind of answered that, but thanks very much.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any more hands up? Dan, I did see your hand up briefly, but has Paul stolen your thunder? Right. Okay. So I'm not seeing any more hands. So we're asked to recommend to the Cabinet meeting next week a change in the financial regulations to increase the write-off to £10,000. Again, because it's a financial matter, I'm going to turn to Matt and ask Matt just to take us round with a formal vote, please.
Thanks, Chair. The usual procedure again, councillors, please. How do you vote, Councillor Cope? For. Councillor Dundas?
For.
Councillor Gocher?
For.
Councillor McCarthy?
For.
Councillor Pearson?
For.
Councillor Willits?
For.
And Councillor Wood?
For.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
That's carried. Thank you. Right. That moves us on or back, depending on how you want to look at it, to Colchester Commercial Holdings. And Andrew Tyrrell is going to introduce this for us, please.
Chair, I think we might have a small introduction from councillors first, I think.
Okay, thank you. Is it over to you, Teresa or Nick?
I'm going to introduce it first as the portfolio holder, and then Nick will add some bits as the chairman of the board when he sees fit. But first of all, as the portfolio holder, can I accept on behalf of the Local Government Chronicle an award which we got for the Entrepreneurial Council of the Year. So it is now in my possession, and when it will eventually find its way into the town hall, but that's the award that we got for being a good entrepreneurial council.
Congratulations to everyone involved.
So just a few words, Chairman, and then I'll pass on over. It's just to say I'm now in my second year as the portfolio holder, and as you were talking about health of councillors before, I didn't expect to be here this year because I thought I'd retired at the last elections, which we haven't had. So I've had to do an extra year, which was not in my original plan, and I'd taken on other jobs, but I'm still here, and I'm enjoying it at the moment. So I want to thank the officers for the work that they've done on behalf of the companies. They're having to work, under difficult circumstances for the time being, but the work has been going ahead, and some of the projects have been completed. And as soon as they can open to the public, such as the Northern Gateway project, you'll see that there's some fantastic work going on. Many of our projects are innovative, and they are there to enhance our green agenda and to do our climate emergency work as well. And despite everything, they still will provide a dividend to the council this year. So I'll just reiterate my thanks to the officers for all the work they're doing, and I'll hand over to Councillor Barlow now, and then it'll be back to Andrew Tyrrell and to Paul Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. Over to you then, Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I only have a few brief things to say. Councillor Higgins has covered most of what I would have said. Like her, I was expecting when I appeared before the committee this time last year, it was going to be my last time doing this as chair of CTHL, but obviously things change. What I think it is worth noting is that this has been an unprecedented year for the council and for the companies. Still very new organisations, only in sort of the third full year of operation, to suddenly have a lot of the business model pulled out from under our feet, particularly in events. Did make this a very tough year, but we are still returning a dividend, as Councillor Higgins said, and I'm very proud of the staff members we've got who've done that and who've put in the work to make sure that the company kept ticking over, and we've kept doing the work and we've kept pushing what we can forward, as well as doing these preparations for a business plan for mapping out over the next 3 years, when I can confidently say I won't be coming back to report on the progress. But there's been a lot going on this year. One thing I just want to say is in reference to the discussion we had at the last governance and audit meeting with the thing that came up from the auditors about the position of the chief executive / managing director being on the board and having that conflict of interest. We are aware of that. Unfortunately, because of the timings, the last governance and audit meeting came after the last board meeting, and this meeting comes a week before our next board meeting. So we've actually these two meetings in between two CCHL board meetings. We will be having our board meeting next week. We will be discussing and hopefully resolving that issue then, so that routine and the rhythm of the meetings, we have
Nick
been able to resolve that in consideration. So I'll pass on to.
Can I just stop you there, Nick? I don't know whether anyone else is having difficulty, but Councillor Barlow was breaking up markedly in those last comments. For me, was that the same for everyone else? Yeah. I don't know whether you just want to.
It just came up to say my internet connection is unstable. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I think if we move on to you then, Andrew.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. I think I might not have muted my mic while I was shuffling in my chair, so apologies for that as well. Matthew, would you be able to share the slides for us, please? I'll just take you through a short presentation before I introduce Paul Smith, who's the Group Director for Colchester Commercial Holdings. So members of the committee have received the report that sets out some of the performance of the companies over the year and presents you with the business plans. Just a reminder that the commercial holdings overarching business plan is public. There's then more detail added to that in the subsidiary business plans, which are confidential, but all of the company's activities are reflected in the overarching public report for openness and transparency. So Matthew, if you can move on to the next slide. I was just going to start with a reminder around the governance here. So I'm not going to dwell too long on this for councillors, but you can see there that the Board of Directors has a strong Colchester Borough Council link, and Colchester Borough Council, being the sole shareholder of the companies, is able to completely influence all of the company's activities and align that. And as I said earlier, for members of the public's benefit, if they're not familiar with the companies, you have the holding company and then the three subsidiary companies, which is energy, homes and trading. And those interlinked companies offer some resilience, I guess, in the context of what we've been talking about tonight, in terms of as different markets are affected by impacts such as COVID, you are able to cross-subsidise and keep the companies returning a profit, as we've just heard from the portfolio holder and the chair of the board for Colchester Commercial Holdings. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Matthew. So again, I'm not going to dwell too much on this because we all know 2020 was a difficult year. The report adds more detail to this, but it was just a reminder that all aspects of those activities have been affected in various ways. So whether that's the estates management for the council, where we've been supporting businesses with economic recovery and still trying to make the most of our own assets for the council's benefit. Events, which obviously the whole programme last year completely were destroyed instantly, really. So now it's back into recommencement. You remember, events was an incredibly successful part of the companies and has really established Colchester as a high profile events place. And we've already announced Ollie Mers for later in the year, this year, to get the large concerts back on. But there's also weddings and a number of smaller events that contribute towards the council's income from the companies. And then the capital projects, which is possibly the most obvious one. All of the projects other than the Mercury Theatre ceased for some temporary period at the start of lockdown back in March and April of last year, as new procedures were put in place to allow construction to continue. But even now and for the foreseeable future, there are social distance and other safe operating procedures on sites, which slows down the capital programme. But it's not all doom and gloom. So despite that, there have been some quite significant milestones. And a couple that I was just going to pull out for the purposes of the presentation are the broadband network, which commenced, secured funding and commenced this financial year. and the lockdown conditions and the high street not being frequented quite so much as normal last summer enabled us to go in and install the infrastructure for broadband without too much disruption to shops, ready for when they reopened. Also allowed us to align that with pavement repairs that the county were doing and coordinate the works in some very good relationship building there on the town centre works. CCTV was also done at the same time, so that's still in the process of being rolled out, but the first new digital CCTV system is in operation and has already resulted in arrests, where the improved picture quality has assisted the police in identifying perpetrators there. That has all been undertaken at the Northern Gateway with the walk, and we've also seen the first houses being built at Crefeld Villas, and they're due to complete in March. So we'll have the first of the mixed tenure schemes being developed by Amphora. So you're starting to see the fruits of the labour over the last few years. And I'm going to move on to the Northern Gateway in a little bit more detail, if that's okay. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. The Northern Gateway, as I say, we've seen a commencement on site with the walk, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in 2 slides. But I just wanted to remind people that there's a mixed development coming there that is now under construction, with the walk starting and with the sports park now being complete, enabling the rugby club to move to bring this development forwards. And if we just move on one more slide, it shows how these use zones are now planned for and how they will look in due course, linking from the right-hand side there on the Mill Road end with the Village Green across to Axial Way with the commercial space with our housing development in the middle of that. And if we move on, the walk itself, underneath the walk, we've already started to install the heat network infrastructure, the broadband infrastructure as well. So we're able to coordinate all of these things through the various companies we've got and the interlinked activities that they have that enable all of this to be brought forward in a planned approach. So you can see on the left-hand side some photographs of that actually going in on site, and then the artist's impression of what this will look like in due course. And of course, this is a main walking and cycling route through the Northern Gateway because it's a leisure-led development, the Northern Gateway, that's to encourage sustainable modes of travel, active travel, and safer, healthier lives for the benefits of everyone there, linked to the existing communities at Highwoods and at Myland. If we can move on to the next slide, if that's okay. So this links ultimately to the sports park, which I think has to be the highlight of any year, but to have now delivered that and be ready for opening as soon as we can safely do so. You can see here the finished cycle track, which is a mile-long closed circuit track, and the building in the top right-hand corner. And if we just flick forwards onto the next slide, you can start to see some of the great facilities that are up there, and it really will be a regionally significant sports centre, but not just for elite sports. So if we just move on to the next one, I think a key point to highlight is that this really is for everyone. We've got a number of facilities that will be there, from learn to ride, to help people get into cycling in the first place in a safe environment, for wheels for all and adapted bikes for people with disabilities, and just a number of sports that people either will have better access to or new access to increase the offer that Colchester has for its residents and for visitors as well. And this is going to be a key part of recovery, with encouraging people back out, encouraging healthier lives, and part of that economic recovery. So I think those are themes that are in all of the council's activities, and you see they're all in all of the company's activities as well because of that alignment. If we just move on to the next slide, if that's okay, that is part of the reason why the decisions that the council took several years ago to form these companies has resulted in those awards. So we have the LGC award that you've just seen the trophy for. That's the first time we've all seen that, with that just recently received. And then the MJ Awards as well, we also won for Best Commercial Counsel. And I've just included a quote here from the judges, and I think particularly pertinent for this committee is right in the middle of that quote. There's a sentence that says, "There's a good blend of governance and accountability," and that's really reassuring that an independent judging panel has recognised that in what they saw in the submission for those awards. So at that point, I'm going to hand over so that Paul can take the presentation forwards and talk to you about the business plans for the next 3 years of the company, recovering on that recovery period, and the assumptions that sit behind that, to just show you some of the assurance that you can have that those business plans are sound. So I'll hand over to Paul Smith now.
Thank you. Over to you then.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Andrew. Could I have the next slide, please, Matthew? So as Andrew mentioned there, I'll take you through the assumptions that are included within the business plans. The decisions that we're looking at tonight are to actually, rather than going from a triennial snapshot, is to look at a rolling rolling yearly business plan review. And to really emphasize that process is looking at what we've been going through recently. We do have an amazingly close relationship with the council and all our colleagues there. And this process, we've been discussing our plans with the SMT, going through the individual subsidiary boards, having discussions with leadership. And that really leads up to the fact that the results of the CCHL are included within the CBC budget. And that's actually going to Cabinet in January. So we're looking for the governance and audit to review what has been produced, and I'm going to take you through those assumptions now. And as Councillor Barla highlighted, is that because of the timings, we've actually got the Governance and Audit Committee tonight, while we have the CCHL board next week. The reports, the business plans have all been fully circulated to all the CCHL and subsidiary board members, so that they're all very much aware of what has been paired with their agreement and is being laid before you today. And of course, the CCHL business plans is scheduled to go to the Cabinet in March. So next slide, please. So I'm going to take you through the assumptions, and it has already been mentioned to you that there is commercial sensitive information within the confidential papers. So I will be careful to make sure that we're not giving away some of our commercial sensitivity. Next slide, please. It's important to remind ourselves exactly what CCHL does provide. As Councillor Higgins mentioned, we are providing a dividend this year in a year that has been devastated by COVID, which is not a surprise. But we're providing financial support and also other support for the services, the strategic priorities of the councils. And there are some other ancillary benefits, which one may describe as invisible earnings, which I'll touch on at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So moving into the crux, because we want to understand what has been included within this business plan, what is the resilience of that. And I'll advise all the members today that what we have looked at is not a pessimistic report, not an optimistic report, but a realistic business plan. A business plan that has got good resilience behind it, that we really do feel is going to be delivered in this very difficult year as we come out of COVID, and hopefully the vaccine is going to permit that coming out in June, July and August, as we can start to get back to a little bit more of the new normality. But within the estates team who manage our commercial portfolio, what we have included now is the £15,000 worth of valuation fees. Now that valuation process used to be undertaken by a third party external to the group. So it's good to actually see that coming in-house and is actually keeping our money within the organisations, and the organisations being CBC and Pwrb, and of course CBH. Let's try and keep as much of that money in our house as possible. And as for the 100 homes profits. And fundamentally, all the other costs within the estates team has remained very much the same, adjusted for inflation. Next slide, please. Our commercial management team, we're creating a bed of expertise there with regard to commercial management of some of the capital projects of the council. And obviously, you've just seen one of the major projects there, the £28 million sports park that has been finished and is going to open hopefully on the 26th of April. But what we have included in the coming year is a continuation of the fees for delivering the walk on the CNG South, the continuation of the full fast fibre. There are some community facilities that are coming through, and we have had the benefit of the £1 million town deal advance works, and we are obviously hoping that the remainder of the town deal will come through, and hopefully we'll have notification of that work coming through late February, maybe early March. Meeting the needs of all of that, we have included the addition of 2 other project managers as the work increases. Obviously, we're going to be increasing our resources in line with the capital programme that is coming forward. Next slide, please. Our CCTV, Andrew possibly stole a little bit of our thunder because we are actually upgrading to the digital system, and the digital quality that we are getting is amazing when you look at it and compare it to the old analog side. And not wanting to give away too much of our CCTV security systems, we are increasing the coverage within the town, which will be adding to the safe environment of the Colchester town centre. And as you can see there, that we have really included that cost, and we've also really managed the rest of the costs within line with inflation. Next slide, please. Helpline has been such an important service during this COVID period. We have continued to maintain the service there. Our staff have been absolutely fantastic, operating in complete compliance. Really very difficult to begin with when there was a lack of PPE, but that was very soon resolved with the council, and we've then been able to continue that. There is a tender submission that we are in for. That's all I'm going to say for that at the present time, because it is a live active tender. But we have hedged our bets on that, and we haven't been overly optimistic in creating huge opportunities there. And we're also now seeing that the client commissioning group and also the ECC contributions are now being removed. That is policy decisions that they are actually taking forward. So we've included that reduction of income from our financial predictions moving forward. And of course, we've got the benefit of having the digital platform, and we've included the digital costs. We're moving from analog from all our customers and going into digital, and that's going to be happening over the 3-year period of this business plan. Next slide, please. Our events, as mentioned, has been devastated, as many of the leisure aspects due to the global pandemic. Our staff are furloughed, some of them are on flexi furlough, as we're managing cancellations, managing opportunities as we come forward and look to come out of lockdown and start to actually look forward to the hopeful return of our events in both outdoor, indoor, including the weddings. Andrew mentioned that we've secured Ollie Murs for the bank holiday weekend in August. We have had an amazing sale of tickets there, and there are some great opportunities that we're looking at for further events at the end of this year. So we are planning in getting the events business moving again. But again, we have not been overly optimistic. We haven't said we're going to be back out there in April or May. We've been quite realistic in really looking at that August period as being the start of the return of some events. And we are actually also considering that there's still going to be restrictions with regard to the information that's coming out about the vaccine and the potential for still being infected and still being able to transmit the virus. We don't know, so we have been realistic in our assessments and delivering our business plan. We also included, further to an internal audit that we had and looking at how we're managing our events. And we are now moving to a completely cashless environment. So we do have that additional cost there to make sure that we're operating in a very efficient and very modern way and removing all cash from all premises on all the events. And of course, we got the benefit that we've now agreed the agreement to hire out the old library at the town hall, which all the SLAs gives a great benefit to the council. They are great income to help support the budgets for the council. And of course, within the CCHL business plan, we're looking to make sure that we have got activities hiring out of the old library to cover those costs. Next slide, please. So moving on to for our homes. We have had the great enjoyment that we have seen the commencement of our first housing construction at Creffield Road, known as Creffield Villas, the conversion of an existing building. And the insert picture there to the right-hand side is two brand new properties that we're building in the garden. The property at Creffield had a large garden. Those properties are scheduled to be complete in March/April. And so we'll be looking that they will be returning a profit figure either in the back end of this year or in the next financial year. And then, of course, we have Mill Road. Now, Mill Road, we know, doesn't have the benefit of its outline hybrid planning consent. We are working very hard with Essex Highways to resolve issues, and we are hoping that we will be getting the outline planning consent. But because of that timing, we don't see, and we have not included any housing completions at all within year one of the next 3-year plan. They will then all start to come out in 22-23. And the garage sites, which are so important in providing much needed homes, we have looked at the current stream and the potential and the potential pipeline schemes that we have got there. And we have included a modest 35 new homes coming out from those garage sites. Next slide, please. And moving on to energy. Energy is a path finding amazing, sustainable energy source for Colchester Northern Gateway. The delay in the planning has caused a delay in the heat sales. Where it hoped that the local plan would have been adopted, planning application would have gone through by now, that hasn't happened. So in the next 3 years moving forward, the previous grant that was given to the energy company, that is now concluded. So there is no longer any benefit coming through. You can see that it was at £73,000 a year. And we are now predicting, because of reduced capitalisation in relation to the feasibility of the scheme, where we're going to have to write off some of the ongoing costs as revenue items rather than capitalising those items, that we are predicting a loss. It is not a significant loss, but it is a loss until the heat sales build up. And the heat sales build up with regard to the housing, the medical centre, the care village, the commercial units, which we know are not going to really be coming forward for the next 2, 3, 4 years. However, we are still covering the SLA charges there, and that goes down to the award that we have got. We have 3 companies that are fantastic different qualities, but we have the ability to cross-subsidize each other. So we can carry on delivering these pathfinding initiatives, supporting the strategic priorities of a green sustainable energy, and move that forward in a very, very positive way. Next slide, please. So having said all of that, what we're looking at this year, ending the 31st of March, we're looking at £226,000 as a profit for distribution. And I use that word profit, or those words, profit for distribution rather than dividend, because it is the shareholders, this committee, it is the council who fully owns Colchester Commercial Holdings and its subsidiary companies to decide whether that is a full dividend, whether that is to be used to repay back loans, or whether that is to be retained by the companies to build up reserves within the companies. Because if we carry on constantly paying back all these surpluses back to the council, then the companies will be constrained because they're not building up some of their own reserves to move forward and start doing some things on their own right. Because we do need to move the companies forward in a commercial way that gives them an opportunity to enhance their services beyond the council, to make sure that we're maximising the intent of what the companies were set up for. So when we look at the 3 years, you can see that the first year, 21-22, is very low. There is no house sales coming out from Mill Road. We have a devastated events business sitting in there, and we're bringing forward the energy company. Then you can see in years 2 and 3 here, the dramatic shift in the surpluses that are being created, which is the events business getting back to a position where it was prior to COVID, where we see housing sales coming through from Mill Road, CNG South, and moving forward in a progressive way with regards to all the services within the trading, the commercial services, the estate services, the helpline services. So very comfortable, and obviously we'll have the Q&A very shortly, that next year is realistic because we need to make sure that the budget's balanced and we don't want to be creating further pressures, further stresses on the council by an underperformance from Colchester Commercial Holdings and its subsidiary companies. Next and final slide, I do believe, Matthew. Nope, sorry, my apologies. So we talked about some other ancillary benefits, and it was a question that was posed to us from leadership as to, so what else does the council, what else does CCHL and its subsidiaries provide? And we've listed out some of the issues that are there, and I won't read through them all, and hopefully you can read that on your screens. And we then tried to articulate that and enumerate that. And when we put some numbers to that, that came up to the £721,000. So it was important to understand that the companies have been set up to support, to be an inward-looking technical company to support the services of the council, but also to try to actually grow and be commercial beyond that. But in so doing all of that, there are these other ancillary benefits, invisible earnings that we all generate working together and collectively with the council. And it's very important to remember, which is one of the key things that I think that we need to always remind ourselves, we're here on our homes company to deliver 30% affordable housing. And when I checked with Karen Syret from the planning department, she did provide me with information on all the past consents that have been given. And the private developers are using economic viability to demonstrate that they can't afford to deliver 30% affordable homes. So we need to be very proud that we've set up our businesses, and we are definitely going to be delivering a policy of 30% affordable housing. And that first policy decision is coming through at Creffield Road, and the larger housing numbers will come through on Mill Road. Next and final slide, I'm sure. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. So if you want to take the slide down, we can take it back to yourself, Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Andrew. Right. So just a reminder, members, that Governance and Audit Committee is acts on behalf of the council as the shareholder for CCHL. We have 3 things to consider in the recommendations this evening. And I'm proposing that 2.1 and 2.2 we take as a named vote. 2.1 is to review and make recommendations to Cabinet around the draft business plan for 21-24. 2.2 is to consider whether, given the current global uncertainties, we want to recommend a shift to a rolling 3-year business plan for the immediate future. So I think I'm proposing that we take that one first and then 2.1. And 2.3 is just to review everything that we've heard this evening, everything that's in the documents before us, and ask questions or comment on them. And finally, there are some confidential matters, some confidential items that are in part B of our agenda this evening. So I would just ask you not to refer to any of those in this part of the agenda, please. I'm conscious of the fact that it's 8 o'clock, and normally I'd take a break at this point, but given that we've just had all of that information put in front of us, it might be useful for you to take the opportunity to ask questions and comment now whilst it's still fresh, rather than us taking a break at this point. So I'm going to open up to questions or comments. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. A very good presentation, lots of good stuff in there. I suppose my only comment really, and to a certain extent this comes up every year, obviously where you list the priorities in the presentation, where there's listed as dividends, supporting the strategic priorities and ancillary benefits. I suppose that my only concern is really, although they're listed, when developing the plan or thinking about what the council or councillors want the commercial companies to do, we don't actually give any weighting to those things. Now, I appreciate that sometimes it's lucky and they all coincide together and they all deliver together. Sometimes they're conflicting. If you imagine there's a line of pure commercialism and we want maximum profits at one end, and at the other end, it's sometimes perhaps delivering more affordable housing or delivering our green agenda. And there's very little definition in the report where on that line we as a council think the commercial company should be. We know it should be somewhere along that line, and perhaps we know it when we see it, but there's not really any guidance in the plan for the board and the management of the commercial companies to really know perhaps where they should be. So it's just a general observation, which perhaps we as a council perhaps need to think about defining that slightly tighter in future. Also in the business plan, I think it's quite right. I think moving to a rolling 3-year is a good suggestion. Obviously, when we're looking particularly on the housing, and again, this came up last year, but we're another year forward. We're talking in 2021, 2022 in the report about delivering projects which were approved by Cabinet in 2018. So looking at a 3-year plan, there's going to be things in 23 and 24 we're doing, or by we I mean Pwrb, which will be what is delivered in 27 and 28. There's a little bit of vision lacking in there as to what you'll be doing in 2024 in terms of securing activities to deliver in 2026, 2027. You know, as I said before, on the housing, we're taking a lot of the low-hanging fruit, to use a better description, where we're just building on council-owned land, which is fine. I agree with much of that, but that is a finite resource. And by 2024, a lot of that will run out. So I'd expect to see a little bit in the report, looking 3 years ahead, as to what you'll be doing in 2024 to have projects to deliver in 2027 that may be looking for commercial acquisitions. But it's not clear whether that, I might have missed it in the report, in which case I apologise. And I suppose my only other question really, just a little bit of clarity really, I think it's in paragraph 10.5 where you talk, the predicted dividends, which is fine. There's a reference, and it's probably me being a bit thick, so I apologise, in there to the profit available from distribution will differ slightly to the past dividends and non-housing profits. I just wonder if you could just clarify exactly what that means, or perhaps a little bit more background behind it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. One or two questions to get your teeth into there. I think in terms of the direction of travel, that one's probably best passed on to Councillor Barlow and Adrian Pritchard.
I'm quite happy to take that, but Adrian, if you want to come in.
Chair, I absolutely understand Councillor Dundas' point, I must say. I do think that is a debate that we certainly have in the board at CCHL, but also quite clearly, you know, the Cabinet also have those conversations. So if you look at each of these subsidiaries, you will see that, for example, Colchester Amphora Housing Limited is very clear, as is Cabinet and has been Cabinet, that we will deliver 30% affordable housing. It's at that end of the spectrum. We could make another £3, £4, £6 million if we would want to, but then it means that we do exactly the same as private developers, and we say, sorry, these sites are not really viable, actually, unless we, if we deliver affordable housing without being able to make our 20–30% profit. So I think we are pretty clear on the housing side that is the imperative from the current Cabinet, is that affordable housing is one of their #1 top priority. So we will be continuing to deliver 30% affordable housing. Clearly, if there's a new council, if there's a new Cabinet, we could certainly have that debate, couldn't we? I think in terms of the energy side, again, I think that is about our sustainability and green credentials. We are not looking to make a 15, 20, 25% return on that. If we did, we'd go to oil, gas-fired boilers, etc., in order to have heat up there, because that would make you more profit. For us, it's saying, no, one of the top strategic priorities of the council is our green credentials and our sustainability going forward. So again, we're very clear on what spectrum we're on at that point. I think again, trading, again, I think that one's less clear, in that, you know, we've been doing events, and we think that we had a very successful events company and events organisation. But again, part of it was to promote footfall, part of it was to promote Colchester, part of it was to help the local economy rather than Colchester Borough Council. So again, we were clearer that was what we were trying to do. However, I think we were more on the commercial side in terms of those events. And Councillor Dundas, I don't know if that helps, but actually I think that's an ongoing conversation that we should continue to have, because I do believe that we need to move and shift in terms of that spectrum of purely, utterly commercial through to very public sector orientated. And I think that's a matter for our shareholder, which is the council and the Cabinet. I hope that helps, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Councillor Barr, did you want to add anything to that?
Just briefly, I think Adrian's covered most of the points there, and apologies that my internet connection appears to be a bit unstable this evening. But I think the point to make in terms of how we operate as a board is that the operating parameters for the company are set by the council, by this committee as shareholder, and by the Cabinet. So they, in a way, determine what we're going to do. What's up to the board is the board and the staff, and that you decide how we're going to achieve that. But those goals are what's set by the shareholders. So things like Adrian said, like the 30%. affordable housing. We don't question that. It's a question of how we're going to actually achieve that. So yeah, the thing is that those long-term, some of it's baked into the way the companies were set up. Some of it is an ongoing process by which the council could change things as we go ahead. Cabinet could say we want lots more events, or we don't want any more events, and we'd adapt to do that. But the board's role is choosing how we do that. It's not necessarily choosing what we do. That's set by the shareholder.
Thank you, Nick. Right. Paul Smith, I'm going to invite you now to come in on the rest of the questions or comments that were made by Councillor Dundas, please.
Thank you very much. I think, Councillor Dundas, the remaining outstanding question is with regard to 10.5 and the statement there about the profit distribution. When Colchester Northern Gateway was put forward and approved, the funding mechanism that was put forward, part of the funding was going to be the cash generated from the house sales was going to be used for repaying back the loans that were taken out by the council to fund that significant capital project. So as much as within the Pwrb company, it will be showing that there is a profit surplus. The council may choose not to declare that as dividend, but to actually take that money, take that surplus in cash and use that as cash to actually pay back the funding mechanism that was used to actually take the CNG gateway forward. So that's why we've added that element in, because it's important to understand that Pwrb is still performing. However, in future years, the council may choose, well, I'm not taking dividend, I'm using the surplus to actually repay loans. Therefore, there would be a misconception that it would appear that the Pwrb business is returning a lower dividend when actually it's still performing well. And that's why I have changed the definition to surpluses for distribution right across the board. So we've then got a common reporting so that we can all clearly identify what the Pwrb businesses are actually generating.
Right, and I think the other question that Councillor Dundas posed was around post 24 into 25, 26, 27.
Yes.
Did it make sense to have anything in the business plan around, what that crystal ball gazing might look like?
Yes, within the individual subsidiary business plans, which are confidential to this public meeting, there is then, I very much liked your definition there, or your analogy of the low-hanging fruit. Certainly within the business plans of the Pwrb business plans, we're definitely going for the middle-hanging fruit to create those opportunities exactly as you've outlined for those future years.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas, anything you want to come back on?
No, thank you for the answers. There's other people wanting to ask questions, so I'll
Thank you. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, I fully support the idea of going for a rolling 3-year programme. Given the uncertainties that we have with COVID and finance and so on, I think it is unrealistic to try and sort of nail Pwrb's foot to the floor on a 3-year programme now. I think it's much better to see what progress, what dividends are being declared over each year, and then do an iterative exercise to take on board whatever they can offer to deliver the chosen council services in their portfolio in the best possible way. And I think it's very sensible to go for the 3-year rolling programme all round. My first question is to the portfolio holder, Councillor Higgins, about what political direction is being given to the companies in regard to how much profit they can make. I mean, in simple terms, many of the activities, you can make as much profit or as little profit as you wish. I mean, I know leisure isn't fully in the companies. You only provide the strategic management, but it's probably the easiest one to illustrate. I mean, if you're providing sports facilities, you can either take the view that this is something which is good for the community and we will make no profit on it at all, or you can say, well, David Lloyd down the road is making a massive profit. Well, they probably hope they are. On the same sort of activities, and we too could make a massive profit and feed it back into the council to subsidise those services which the council thinks are needy. So someone has to take a decision on how profitable these companies should be, and of course it's not one activity. There are a range of activity, from social housing, where one probably takes a different view, to the events company. But how is the political setting of those goals being decided and monitored? And this is at a political level by the portfolio holder, because that isn't obvious, that isn't wholly transparent in how many of the decisions which we heard about what should be done and how much money should be made out of these activities in the earlier presentation. It doesn't shine through. My second point in regard to the overall business plan for the next 3 years is that the companies tend to be very urban focused, and that might well be down to the low-hanging fruit argument. But it would appear that when it comes down to broadband and the government grants which the companies got, the council got for broadband, and on CCTV, that the companies are urban-centric, and CCTV is being run out in with all its massive high definition in the urban areas, but the larger villages are being left behind. Likewise on broadband, as Councillor Goucher was rightly saying earlier on, you know, if you're an officer or a member out in the sticks, you don't see the amphora van pushing forward your broadband. Now, of course, it can be, as I say, this is a strategic direction that the company should only be operating in the urban areas. But given that it is a council exercise and that the council covers a much wider area and half the population are not in the urban areas, is the business plan a bit lopsided in the way it is selecting its projects and delivering them? And my final question this stage, Chairman, is that as indicated in paragraph 511 of this report, any profitable trading activities under the guise of the Localism Act have to be carried out within the orbit of a trading company. The most profitable trading activity which the council has, which is parking, is not in the trading companies at the moment. And is there any intention or serious inclination to actually include this within the orbit of the trading companies for the next 3-year plan? Because at times we seem to have great difficulty in deciding what we should be doing with parking. And I certainly can see merits in transferring it into a more agile trading company which can deal with it, but there is no proposal to do so at the moment, and I just wonder why. So those are my starting questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Withits. So your first question was to Councillor Higgins, so I'll bring Councillor Higgins in.
Thank you very much. I think the political direction is tied in with the strategic direction of the Cabinet and the Council as a whole. We've got strategic priorities coming forward that have got various elements to them, such as, you know, the greening of the borough and the sustainability and all those sorts of things like that. So it may not come out into the business plans, but I think it's been shown that we are a caring council and that we are making sure that we look after the residents in the ways that we can. So the fact that we've got 30% affordable homes as part of as one of our targets, you know, that's a very good target to have, and that is a political direction that's been taken by the council to do so. I think the other things that both Paul Smith and Andrew were talking about is to do with the heat energy. We could make vast sums of money, but we're not that sort of council because we care for the residents, and we're trying to make sure that when we build those houses, the residents will have a decent heat source. So I think the political direction has come from my predecessors in this job, and also the President's strategic plan that we've got coming in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. Paul Smith, do you want to respond to the other questions that were posed by Councillor Willits, please?
Yes, very happy to, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your questions, Councillor Willits. So with regard to the urban focus and the broadband, so we're talking about the broadband and the CCTV going to the outer reaches of the borough. It is, we have the benefit that we were able to get the funding, the grant funding, to bring in the full fibre, which are going to be providing 1 gigabyte per second. Now, this is very much, I can liken this to the town deal, where this is seed infrastructure work. This is seed financing that we're getting in that is going to facilitate a huge improvement over the coming years. So what we're looking at on the LFFN, the full fibre network, is that we are creating a Metronet link, and that is predominantly for northern Colchester. We're then putting in 12 fast digit nodes to deliver to south Colchester, so that the whole of Colchester will have access to this, and that is businesses and private residents. Now, in association, once we have created that fundamental structure for that, then the statutory providers such as BT Openreach, they can then far more easily create the connection going out to these more rural areas to provide that fast fibre. And that is part and parcel of the strategy. Colchester Borough Council was very good in going off and seeking and getting this funding, because BT Openreach would never have done this work. We wouldn't have Colchester going on the map as a high digital place to actually run your business, to come to Colchester to run your business, especially now as we're looking to work in a different way post the pandemic. So in the fullness of time, there will be these fast links going out to the reaches of the borough. And it is the same for the CCTV. The CCTV is linking into that network. And indeed, we have now got CCTV at Colchester Northern Gateway. And again, because this is a public facing meeting, we have got cameras that are all being monitored by our control centre in the town hall at Colchester Northern Gateway. So already we've gone beyond the town centre, and that is ourselves just doing this work. So I think very much that we will be expanding that service as we move forward. Then the final question was on 5.11, which was the profit.
Shall I bring, I think at this point, I'll bring Adrian Pritchard in on that, if I may, Paul.
Chair, yeah. Thank you. Chair, thank you. I don't want to cut across, Paul, but I felt that the question was probably more appropriate for me to answer as Chief Executive of Colchester Borough Council, on the basis that we certainly know that our medium-term financial forecast looks pretty bleak, doesn't it? You will see that at Cabinet, in the Cabinet report and at scrutiny, and you'll see it in the full council over the next 3 years. You know, we need between 1.6 million next 22-23, building up to something like 5.7, 5.8 million by 2 years after that. And therefore, I am instigating a full review and a transformation again of the organisation. And one of the strands will be looking at our current services within the Borough Council and whether or not they would be better located perhaps in Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited and one of the subsidiaries, because it might be that we feel that we have more appropriate opportunities to drive more income in. Having said that, I'm not prejudging that. I just think it's absolutely right that those large income streams we should have a look at, and we should decide whether or not you as council, and certainly at cabinet level, decide whether or not it's more appropriate to be in a trading company or not. What I would say, and so we are going to be doing that work in this coming financial year, Councillor Willits, in order to inform our medium-term financial forecast and our savings targets from 22-23 onwards. What I would just say on North Essex Parking Partnership clearly is, one, it is North Essex Parking Partnership. We have a joint committee, and therefore we have a number of authorities that would need to be consulted on whether or not it came into a trading organisation such as CCHL or one of its subsidiaries. And secondly, parking income is ring-fenced. So unfortunately, one can't use it to cross-subsidise. One can't use it for further profit for the borough council. It is ring-fenced for specific purposes. That's not to say that it can't be, improved. I'm absolutely not saying that, but it is a limitation in that you can't utilise it in perhaps the same way as you can the events company or the housing company. I hope that helps, Chair.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to move on now to Councillor Hogg and Councillor Gocher, and then if there are any more questions or comments, I'm going to propose that we have a break, but we'll see how we go. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chairman. All right. There's an awful lot of good news in here. There's obviously going to be problems going forward, as we've heard, but for me, I certainly welcome it, particularly over the Northern Gateway Sports Park, that's going to benefit the whole of the borough. But that's an exciting thing, I think, that we can shout out from the rooftops. I certainly welcome the 30% affordable homes that we've agreed to. Very welcome. A couple of my questions are about CCTV and broadband. How this will impact upon our residents, my residents going out into the urban areas. Can you tell me that if do you see any, will the officers see any limitations, financial or otherwise, in rolling this out on a timeline, and what kind of timeline are we looking at for this? Because this could be very exciting, particularly in the larger communities. I can think of several areas in St Anne's in particular that could benefit from fast broadband, and I have areas in my ward that desperately need CCTV of a high quality. So if I could ask that any limitations, financial or otherwise, to this rolling out going forward, but welcome the report. There's an awful lot of good news in here, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. I'm just because of the nature of that question, I'm wondering whether that's better left to the confidential part of the meeting. So if I come to you then, Councillor Gocher.
Oh yeah, thanks for the report. It was very interesting to hear, and very, as Councillor Hogg said, lots of positive things in there. I'm very pleased to hear about the CCTV. In the town centre, it's something that gets raised a lot with me by businesses as well as private individuals, that we need more CCTV. So that's very, very positive. The one thing I was going to just ask about is that it was mentioned that there's a possibility that the profits generated by the companies might, rather than being used by the council, might be put back in the companies as reserves. And I'm just wondering why, as a council, we would agree to that, because surely the whole point is to generate profit that would then be used by the council, maybe to help balance the books in these difficult times. So what benefits to the council would there be to let the companies just keep those profits in their reserves to enable them to maybe increase their commercial activities? How would that benefit us as a council, rather than taking the profit and using it to fund our services?
Thank you, Councillor Gocher. I'm going to bring Adrian Pritchard in on that one.
Chair,
thank you. Chair, thank you. Just in terms of that latter point, certainly, and I'm happy to let Paul pick up the earlier point, but in terms of the company building up some surpluses, some reserves, clearly that's to give those companies a bit of resilience in terms of having difficult times, rather than coming back to the council cap in hand. That's how the private sector certainly works, and that's how you would get some form of credit rating. You would then be able to look at a wider range of financial borrowings, for example. Not saying we're going to that point, but actually it gives you those opportunities and those options. And secondly, that actually, if it's an opportunity, then actually one of the subsidiary companies wants to look at, and part and parcel of those business plans in Part B are about business development, then it has some of those resources to be able to go and do that, undertake feasibility, for example, rather than continually come back to the council and say, can we have £10,000 for this? Can we have £5,000 for that? Can we have £50,000 for that? It's just a bureaucratic, honestly, it's a bureaucratic nightmare. And actually, I think that you would lose the transparency of what's going on. Very clear in the companies. Here is any reserves that one's built up. Here is how they've been used and spent or not spent, etc. And therefore, I just think it's a much cleaner, clearer, business-like way of doing business. As I say, it is obviously for the council to decide, but in my view, all businesses certainly would want to build up some form of reserves. And I don't mean millions and millions of pounds, but some form of reserves to be able to undertake business development, to be able to underwrite something that actually didn't quite work, etc., as part and parcel of the whole Colchester Commercial Holdings Company. I hope that helps.
I'm going to bring Councillor Barlow in now, and then I'm going to propose an adjournment. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in response to Councillor Goach's comment, and to back up what Mr. Pritchard said, I've had this discussion with the leader of the council and with Councillor King on occasions before, when we've talked about this going forward, and it's a political decision about how much of the profit the company makes, how much you want, if you want the companies to hold on to that, or if you want to take it all for the council. But like Mr. Pritchard said, there are practical reasons for doing that, and they would be explained. It wouldn't just be, we want to hold on to this money because we want a big pile of cash to sit on. It would be there because we've identified reasons, like I said, for business development moving forward. And it's part of the thing is that I think we have to be careful is not just to see the companies as a short-term cash cow, because you can do that and you can take all that money out, but if you don't leave that amount in there that we can use for business development, and I think there's some things that may come up in the confidential, we can give some more detailed examples of things that are coming up in the next few years on that. But I think if you don't do that, then eventually the well dries up. So you have to sort of keep reinvesting some money in, and that has to come from profits. So but it would always be identified and shown we are keeping this in reserves for this reason, because as a company that's wholly owned by the council and the 100% shareholders, you have that say over how much we do with that. But I think it is part of that ongoing dialogue between the company and the council about how it operates and what it does with those profits and reserves.
Thank you. Right, so I'm going to propose that we break now and come back at 1:45. So then if there are questions still around that need to be answered and posed in open session, we can do that. We've got the recommendations to go through and just one more item on the public agenda. So all back at 1:45, please. Are you sharing, Mark?
And it kept me going during the day with teaching from home.
Have you any more questions or comments for the open session? No, Dennis?
No, I've got no more comments. I've got no comments for the private session either.
Oh, okay.
It goes into too much detail, really.
Can I just remind councillors that we are still streaming?
Thank you. Are we ready to restart, Hayley?
Ready when you are, Chair?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take the notice down.
Thank you. Right, welcome back, everyone. So we were dealing with questions and comments on the business plans for CCHL. Any more questions or comments that can be dealt with in the public session? I'm not seeing any more hands up. So I think we've probably dealt with all of those then. So that takes us on to the decisions that we need to make. And as I suggested, I'm going to take 2.2 first, which is to consider whether, given the current global uncertainties, the committee wishes to recommend a shift to a rolling 3-year business plan period. Hayley, you're now taking the votes, aren't you? So if I could pass on to you, please.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. So, councillors, the normal process, I will come to you in alphabetical order, and if you can just give me for or against. So, Councillor Cope.
For.
Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Gocher.
For.
Councillor McCarthy,
For.
Councillor Pearson,
For.
Councillor Willits,
For.
and Councillor Wood.
For.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's unanimous. That's agreed. And then 2.1 is to review and make recommendations to Cabinet on the new draft Colchester Commercial Holdings business plan for 21-24, etc. Again, Hayley, if you could do the honours.
Of course, so I'll come to you in order again. Councillor Cope.
For.
Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Gocher.
For.
Councillor McCarthy.
For.
Councillor Pearson.
For.
Councillor Willits.
For.
And Councillor Wood.
For.
Thank you. Right, that's unanimous as well. Well done, everyone. And I mean, the last item there was just to review the achievements and note the ongoing governance arrangements, which I think we've done. Right. Well, thank you one and all for your input on this item. We just have the work programme to complete and agree. So it's just for our final meeting in March. Any questions or comments on that? No? So just a nod, a wink and a show of a hand that you're in agreement with that. Thank you. Okay. So that brings us to the end of the public meeting. I know we still have a question from Councillor Hogg that probably needs dealing with in the closed session. So, Hayley, if you could just take us through what everyone needs to do, please.
Chairman, can I just interject? If it's only myself that was looking for an answer to the questions I posed, I'm happy to take that outside of the meeting on an email from the, rather than if it's only myself.
Thank you,
do that outside the meeting.
That's very helpful. I'm just going to check with other members then. Are there any questions or comments that you wanted to raise in the confidential section on the confidential items? I'm seeing lots of shaking heads. So with that in mind,
You accept my...
I'm going to accept your generous offer, Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chairman.
And say thank you everyone for your contributions this evening. Much longer than our usual governance and audit committee meetings, but I think it's been useful. And I bid you all a good night and stay safe.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll wait with interest.
Thank you, Chair.
Good night, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.